Hi, Rabbi Skolnik here. Once again, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share some words of Torah with you in advance of Parashat Miketz. But this week is extra special because not only is it Shabbat Parashat Miketz, but of course it's also Shabbat Chanukkah. Miketz is most often read on Chanukkah. There's a special Haftorah, which we'll come back to in a second. First, one or two points about the Torah portion and about Joseph and his brothers. We were introduced to this story last week, and we saw all the indications of Joseph being an annoying, if gifted, young boy whose brothers respond to his difficult personality and visions of greatness in an inappropriate way, which is to understate the fact dramatically, and sell him off into slavery. The story picks up this week with Joseph still in jail, but now the action is going to change. It's almost like chapter 6 of the book of Esther, where when the king can't sleep, he calls to have the chronicles read before him, and that's when he learns that Bigtan and Teresh conspired against him and Mordechai saved his life. It's a very real parallel in this week's Torah portion. It also relates to difficulty sleeping. Pharaoh has a dream. Actually, he has two dreams that are troubling him, and none of his trusted dream interpreters seem to be able to give him an interpretation that really works for him. And then the Sar HaMashkim, the cupbearer, who testifies to Pharaoh that when he was in prison, that he met a gifted young Hebrew who interpreted his dream correctly, and that he thought that Pharaoh would do well to consult this young man. So at the very beginning of the Parsha, Yosef literally gets cleaned up and brought to the Pharaoh and does an excellent job of interpreting Pharaoh's dreams. One of which is about fat cows and skinny cows, and the fat cows being devoured by the skinny cows, and the other is really healthy-looking sheaves of grain being devoured by unhealthy-looking sheaves of grain. And Yosef immediately understands that they're one and the same dream, and they represent, of course, 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. It's really fascinating to see Yosef's gift grow into maturity. He also, if you remember, winds up being sold into slavery because of his dreams, where he has dreams of stars in the sky and the planets. Everything is bowing down to him. And his father understands the implications of the dream, but Yosef really suffers for his dream. But the commentaries all point out that you get a pretty good picture about people from what it is that they dream about. Yosef dreams about greatness. He dreams about the heavens. And Pharaoh dreams about cows. And it sounds, at first blush, kind of like a funny comment, but it is an insight into the rabbis feeling, even thousands of years ago, that the subconscious tells us a lot about a person's nature and about their potential. So that's the first glimmer that we have of Yosef growing into maturity, his ability to really discern deeper truth from the subconscious. The second thing which is fascinating in this week's Parsha, which also testifies to Yosef's growing maturity, and this is the most dramatic example of it, is when Potiphar's wife makes amorous advances to him, and he holds her off. The commentaries on this Parsha don't shy away from making clear the fact that Yosef was in his full male blush. He was a healthy, strapping, healthy man with healthy appetites. And Potiphar's wife, does everything in her power to convince him to commit adultery with her, and Yosef withstands the test. And I personally think that that is the turning point for Yosef, because frankly, Yosef's personality has always been kind of self-indulgent to this point, where he never censors himself. He never really reins himself in. When he has these dreams, instead of keeping them to himself or quietly speaking to his father about them, instead of lording it over his brothers, now Yosef recognizes that the time has come for him to behave like a man, not at the lowest common denominator of a man, but to behave like someone who understands that the implications of his actions have ramifications for people far beyond himself. And his behavior with Potiphar's wife is really extraordinary. Last but not least has to do with the Haftorah that we read this week in observance of Shabbat Chanukkah. The ancient rabbis were the ones who selected the prophetic portions that accompany each Torah reading. And I've always thought, I continue to think, that the selection of the prophet Zechariah, as the Haftorah portion for this week is one that gives us pause. The famous tagline of this Haftorah at the very end is Lo v'chayil v'lo b'choach ki im beruchi amar Adonai tzvaot. The translation of which Debbie Friedman made into a famous signature song of hers. Not by might and not by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord God of hosts. You have to really wonder what the rabbis were thinking when they chose this passage, because the Maccabees, even though they were priests, were all about power. They physically waged war against the Greeks, won an improbable victory, and wrested the temple from the hands of the Greeks so that they could purify it, etc. Their victory was about power. And you have to think that the rabbis were sending a message, as they did, really, if you look closely at the wording of Al Anisim, the special prayer that's inserted into the Amidah, morning, afternoon, and evening, and also Birkat HaMazon, the grace after meals, where the rabbis accentuate the role of God over the role of the Maccabees. The Maccabees fought a physical war. From the rabbis' perspective, the Maccabees were just God's instrument in securing this victory. If it wouldn't have been them, it would have been someone else. And the rabbis, I think personally, had their issues with the Maccabees historically. But in choosing this Haftorah, what they show conclusively is, if you will, the spin that they're trying to put on this story, to remind us that yes, the Maccabees fought a great battle, they won a great victory, but when all is said and done, the victory belonged to God, the victory belonged to the people. The Maccabees were just the instrument for accomplishing it. To all of you, Shabbat Shalom and Chag Urim Sameach.